I'm a country mouse. I grew up in a little rural town where the biggest building around was the local supermarket. My childhood was spent playing in the forests or swimming in the rivers until I was exhausted and going to sleep to the sound of crickets in the night. But as I got older, all the good job opportunities started moving to the cities along with most of the young people in town. It was only a matter of time before I joined them, and that time came when I moved out at 18. I'd landed a job in the city and managed to find a decent apartment close to my new workplace. The experience was jarring, to say the least. Back in the countryside, the loudest noise I'd hear on a day-to-day basis were the roosters crowing or the cows mooing in the fields as they lazily chowed down on grass. But in the city, my senses were always being bombarded by sights and sounds I wasn't used to. Cars honking in the streets in between the angry shouts of road-raging commuters, neon lights illuminating the whole city like a giant amusement park, and a disturbing amount of ambulance and police sirens ringing out every day. It was all overwhelming for someone who grew up in a quiet town like me. The only place where I could get away from it all was my apartment. It was my little island of calm in an ocean of confusion, where I could just lay back and relax while the noisy world outside continued to do its thing. I felt safe there. At least, I did until my neighbors moved in. I wasn't used to having neighbors so close to me. All that really separated our apartments was a single thin wall that allowed me to hear them whenever they played music on their speakers. As much as I wanted to tell them to just get a pair of goddamn headphones, I was too shy to. Plus, I was still getting used to both living alone and in the city at that point. I didn't want to cause any more trouble for myself than I already had by pissing off the people I had to live next to for the foreseeable future. So instead, I just convinced myself that it was normal for people to play metal music at 3 in the morning and tried my best to ignore them. Then they started holding parties. They'd drink and play loud music late into the night alongside at least half a dozen guests. How they managed to fit that many people without getting claustrophobic, I had no idea. None of the other people on my apartment floor did anything about it. When I asked them why they were putting up with all the late-night parties, they gave me the same reasoning I had when I first moved in. They didn't want to cause trouble with someone who lived on the same floor as them, but they also told me something I hadn't known until then. According to them, the guy living beside me was known to have some major anger issues, as well as more than a few screws loose. Once, when I was at work, they heard him beating his then-girlfriend loud enough that people could hear her screams a floor up. The police were called but couldn't do anything in the end when the girlfriend herself covered for him out of love that he clearly didn't have for her. She apparently did leave him a while later, but it also made him much more aggressive than before. Because of that, nobody dared file the complaint when he started throwing his parties. My job had long hours, and I was usually too tired to notice much of anything when I got home, so I hadn't known about any of this before. It was a bit shocking to learn that the person living beside me was such a violent person. Still, most of the neighbors I spoke with were rather old, so I told myself that they could have been over-exaggerating my neighbor's maliciousness. I toughed out the noise for a few nights, but eventually filed a complaint once it started affecting my performance at work. I was at home on one of my off days when I heard the landlord call my neighbor on his phone. I couldn't hear what he said, but judging by what my neighbor said in response, they were probably some pretty stern words. After the call was finished, I heard him open his door and walk into the half. He pounded on my door, shouting for me to get out there so he could give me a piece of his mind. The landlord must have said something that tipped him off on who filed the complaint. Naturally, I was scared, but I didn't think I could call the police if no crime had been committed yet. If they didn't arrest him for beating his girlfriend, then I wasn't sure if they'd arrest him for just being loud outside my apartment. I lay quietly on my bed pretending to not notice him and hoping that he'd assume I was outside. He did stop after a few minutes, though in that time I was worried he might actually break through the door. I let out a sigh of relief when the banging fell silent and fell asleep on my bed, still tired from the previous sleepless night. About an hour later, I woke up to the smell of something burning. I shot up on my bed and felt that the air was intensely hot. Black smoke was seeping into the room from my front door. I was petrified, but my mind snapped back to reality when I heard the sound of sirens outside louder than ever before. I'd heard it so many times before and always thought they were a nuisance. For once, I was actually glad to hear it. I opened the window and saw a group of firemen holding a safety net on the ground below. One of them shouted for me to jump into the net, so that's what I did. I leapt from my windowsill, aiming for the safety net as best I could. All air left my lungs upon impact, and I spent the next few minutes coughing and wheezing as a paramedic took me away. It took the firemen a whole 3 hours to put out all of the fire. 2 of my neighbors, an elderly couple who lived across the hall from me, had perished in the fire. A brief investigation revealed that the cause of the fire was arson. A couple days later, the police visited me in the hospital while I was being treated for carbon monoxide poisoning and asked if I knew any suspicious persons in that apartment. I immediately gave him my neighbor's name. He was arrested shortly after and confessed to the crime. He'd only wanted to get to me for filing the complaint against him, but when he couldn't get me to open the door, he decided to burn down the entire apartment with me in it instead. Even now, I can't help but blame myself for the deaths caused by that fire. My family moved in when I was 12. My dad had gotten a job at another town and just so happened to find an old house on sale that was just within our price range. The house was bigger than our old one. Way, way bigger. Even as a kid with no knowledge of the true value of money, I thought that it was a little weird that we were able to afford it. The thought lasted all of 10 seconds once we arrived at the house, and I got to spend the entire day exploring it. 6 bedrooms, a gigantic lawn that could easily fit a pool, and even a wine cellar that neither of my parents knew what to do with. Each room's opulent size gave the impression that they were made to fit as many people as possible. Even the walk-in wardrobe in the master's bedroom was larger than the bathroom in my old house. It was a dream home for any family that could possibly be classified as a mansion. The only catch was the state it was in when we got there. Despite clearly being made for someone with more money than they knew what to do with, whoever owned it before us did a poor job maintaining it over the years. You'd think that the real estate agent would bother to fix it up a little more before putting it on the market, but no. The cracked yellow walls were in desperate need of a new paint job. Strange stains that I'd assumed to be red wine marked the ugly gray carpet in the living room. And every now and then I'd even hear inexplicable creaking noises from somewhere within the house. At the time, I thought they were rats, and hoped that my dad would take care of them soon. I was beginning to understand why the place was so cheap. Hell, halfway through exploring the house, I was worried that the ceiling might suddenly collapse on me. My parents insisted everything was all right, though. They said all the place needed was a few fixes, and we'd have a house that was the envy of the town. But as cheap as the house was for its size, it still made a sizable dent in my parents' wallets, so hiring some professional renovators was out of the question. Instead, they decided to fix the place up themselves and left me home alone on the second day while they went to the local home improvement store. That was all fine by me. I got the entire house all to myself and made sure to lock every single door before my parents left. With not much to do, I decided to unpack stuff in my new bedroom. I tried my best to clean up, too, but for some reason dust kept falling from the ceiling and dirtying everything again. I heard the rats making the house creak above me the entire time I was trying and failing to clean my bedroom. Eventually, I just gave up and went on to explore the house one last time to see if there was anything I missed. As I was strolling around the second floor, checking on each guest bedroom, I noticed something on the ceiling. It was a trap door to an attic, carefully hidden at the end of the hallway with a single string hanging from it, presumably for pulling the stairs down. I excitedly ran towards it and jumped in the air to grab the string. It took me a few tries with my height, but I managed to grab it and pull down a set of light wooden stairs. Not as much dust fell from the trapdoor as I expected, which I thought was a pleasant surprise. I remember feeling excited to see the attic. I felt like I was Indiana Jones or something, who just discovered a secret passage that even my parents didn't know of. My heart was beating in excitement when I eased my way up the rickety wooden stairs, but it immediately froze when I poked my head into the attic and saw what was inside. The first thing that struck me was the smell. It wasn't the same musty scent that was pervading the rest of the old house. No, whatever was inside the attic was downright rancid, like rotten flesh or food way past its due date. I blinked in the darkness of the attic, trying to get my eyes adjusted to the low light. When I could finally see again, I saw over a dozen empty tin cans, soda bottles, and plastic snack bags littering the floor. My head spun around to survey the rest of the attic. I let out a scream when my eyes locked with something who should not have been there. Sitting crouched in the attic staring back at me, with crazy glassy eyes from behind a curtain of matted black hair, was a haggard-looking man whose clothes were little more than a dirty gray rag. His lips parted into a crooked smile that showed off all 4 of his remaining teeth, and he scurried towards me on his gnarled hands and feet. I jumped off the attic stairs to escape. My feet narrowly avoided landing the wrong way and twisting my ankle. Behind me came the sound of wood splintering and the crazed man yelping in surprise. In his rush to grab me, he accidentally put too much pressure on the shaky old wooden boards that made up the attic stairs and fell through. It bought me the precious seconds I needed to run downstairs and out of that house. A neighbor saw me running outside looking like I'd seen a ghost and opened the door for me to enter. They called the police for me while I sat curled up on their couch thinking about how close I'd gotten to getting caught by the man in the attic. When the police arrived, they found the man under the attic door. He'd landed at an odd angle when crashing through the stairs and broke his leg in the process. It was probably the only reason why I was able to get away. They investigated the attic and found signs that someone must have been living in it for at least a year. He had been a squatter who was forced to move to the attic after the house went back on the market. But that wasn't even the worst part. They found a hole in the attic floor. It was barely noticeable at the distance, just big enough for someone to peek through with one eye. And on the other side of it was a full view of my bedroom. It hadn't been rats making the ceiling creak above me in my room, but the weight of the man on the old attic floor watching me from above. My family continued to live in that house after that, but I never went anywhere near the attic ever again. If you like these scary stories, remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Anyway, you won't be escaping from the fear zone.